Less than 1 mile from the Scottish coast sits a patch of green so deadly it was sealed off for nearly half a century, guarded by prosecution warnings, and a secret deeper than war. In 1942, Churchill's desperate order transformed this tranquil island into the epicenter of Britain's most dangerous biological weapon, an experiment that would contaminate land, unleash death on the mainland, and force the government into decades of silence. How did a £500 purchase turn Gruinard into the deadliest island you are not allowed to visit, and what really happened beneath the cloak of secrecy? The story begins just as the world stands on the brink. In the spring of 1942, with war raging across Europe and the threat of Nazi chemical attacks looming, Winston Churchill summoned his most trusted scientific advisors to Downing Street. He demanded answers. What if Germany unleashed biological weapons on Britain? The risk was no longer theoretical. Intelligence reports warned of German research into plague and anthrax. Churchill's response was blunt. Britain must be ready to strike back with equal force. That order set in motion a chain of events that would reach far beyond any battlefield. Responsibility for this new and secret mission fell to Dr. Paul Fildes, head of the biology department at Portondown, at a facility already known for its work on chemical defense. Fildes was a microbiologist of rare skill and steely resolve. Under his direction, a small team began to plan a weapon unlike anything Britain had built before. Their concept was simple but devastating. It targeted the enemy's food supply. The plan, codenamed Operation Vegetarian, called for the mass production of linseed cakes laced with anthrax spores. Dropped over German pastures, these cakes would be eaten by cattle, spreading infection through livestock and eventually to people. The goal was to cripple the German war machine by destroying its food chain, causing famine and chaos in cities and countryside alike. Churchill's directive gave Fildes nearly unlimited authority. Portondown expanded his research, drawing on resources from across the country. Scientists isolated and cultivated a strain of anthrax known as Volum 14,578, a variant chosen for its deadly efficiency. By the summer of 1942, the first batches of contaminated cattle feed were being produced under strict secrecy. The scale was staggering. 5 million cakes were planned, enough to cover vast swathes of German farmland. But the weapon's power was matched by its unpredictability. Anthrax spores could survive in soil for decades, making any test of the weapon a risk to anyone or anything nearby. The British government needed a remote-controlled site to prove the weapon's effectiveness, somewhere far from prying eyes, but close enough for regular access. The search for such a place would soon lead officials to a small uninhabited island off the coast of northwest Scotland. There, the next phase of Churchill's order would unfold, setting the stage for one of the most dangerous experiments ever conducted on British soil. Gruinard Island sits less than a mile from the Scottish mainland, just off the winding A832 road. At first glance, it is an unremarkable patch of green, 196 hectares of grass and stone, battered by Atlantic winds, with no homes or roads, and only a few sheep wandering its slopes. But in the summer of 1942, this quiet island became the most closely guarded secret in Britain's war effort. The search for a test site had been methodical. Scientists and military officials needed somewhere isolated but not so remote that it was impossible to reach. Gruinard's position in Gruinard Bay between the villages of Gairloch and Ullapool made it ideal. It was uninhabited, visible, but just out of reach, and separated from the mainland by a narrow channel of water. For the War Office, the logistics were straightforward. Supplies and personnel could be ferried across with minimal risk of drawing attention, and the surrounding sea would act as a natural barrier if anything went wrong. Ownership proved less of a challenge than expected. The island belonged to Molly Dunphy, a landowner with personal ties to Churchill's circle. With the country at war, the government held sweeping powers to requisition property for the national interest, but in this case, negotiation was swift and discreet. Dunphy agreed to sell Gruinard for just £500, a sum that reflected the urgency and secrecy of the mission. The sale was formalized in 1942, with the War Office drafting a contract that included a rare repurchase clause. If the island was ever declared safe again, her heirs would have the right to buy it back at the original price. Immediately after the purchase, the island's existence on official maps changed. Gruinard was designated X-Base and its name was erased from public records. All documents relating to the site were classified top secret. Even the land deed was locked away, accessible only to a handful of officials at Whitehall and Portendown. The local council received orders to keep quiet, and no announcements were made in the Highland newspapers. For the next 5 decades, Gruinard would be government property in name only, its true purpose hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and silence. On the ground, the transformation was just as swift. Military patrols arrived to secure the shoreline, and warning signs, plain and official, appeared along the beaches. Landing was strictly forbidden. To the people living in Gairloch and Ullapool, the island became a place of rumours and half-truths, its new status explained only in whispers. The full extent of what was about to happen there remained a secret known only to a select few in London and at Portendown. The stage was set for an experiment that would change the island and its reputation forever. 50 men from Portendown stepped onto Gruinard Island in the summer of 1942, carrying crates, notebooks, and a cargo that would never be spoken of outside official circles. Their orders were clear: test the most lethal strain of anthrax Britain could produce. The team worked in silence, shielded by gas masks and heavy protective suits. Every movement was measured, every protocol rehearsed. The risk was absolute. One mistake and the consequences could reach far beyond the island's rocky shores. Sheep arrived by boat, 80 animals tethered in rows across the wind-blown grass. Each one was marked and spaced at careful intervals. Live-in test subjects for a weapon intended to wipe out herds and, by extension, the people who depended on them. The scientists prepared their munitions, 22 mortar rounds, each packed with a fine deadly powder, and a single aerial bomb designed to spread spores over a wide area. The strain they used, Volume 14578, was chosen for its virulence, its unmatched ability to kill and persist in the environment. It had been isolated and cultured for this very purpose, the product of months of work in sealed laboratories at Portendown. Detonations began on a clear day, the first mortar shells arcing over the island, bursting with a dull thump and releasing invisible clouds. The aerial bomb followed, dropped from a low-flying plane, billowing brown dust that drifted on the breeze. Scientists watched from a safe distance, their faces hidden behind glass and rubber. Each explosion sent spores swirling across the grass, settling on wool and skin. The sheep stood for a while, confused but unharmed. Then, within 72 hours, the first symptoms appeared. Animals staggered, collapsed, and lay still. Blood seeped from their mouths and nostrils, an unmistakable sign of anthrax infection. By the end of the 3rd day, nearly every sheep was dead. Official test logs recorded the sequence in precise detail: the time of each detonation, the wind direction, and the spread of the spores. Cameras captured it all on 16mm color film, reels that would be locked away for more than half a century. In those frames, the story of Gruinard's transformation was written. A quiet island turned into a laboratory of death, its soil seeded with a weapon meant for distant fields. The team's work was methodical, but the scale of destruction was impossible to ignore. Every animal death was a data point, every carcass a warning about what this weapon could do if unleashed on a nation's food supply. The evidence was overwhelming, and the men who witnessed it understood that what had happened on Gruinard could never be allowed to happen elsewhere. But the experiment was not yet finished, and the island's danger was only beginning. Explosives set to bury the anthrax-infected sheep on Gruinard Island failed with a single devastating error. Instead of sealing the remains beneath the cliff, the blast hurled carcasses into the sea. Currents carried the bodies toward the Scottish mainland, where the real consequences of secrecy began to unfold. On the shore near Gairloch, a local dog found one of the washed-up sheep and ate from it. The animal fell violently ill and died within days. Then, livestock in nearby fields started to sicken: cattle, horses, sheep, and even cats. Farmers watched in disbelief as healthy animals succumbed to a disease they had never seen before. The deaths mounted quickly, but officials offered no explanation. The Ministry of Defense moved quietly. Veterinary teams confirmed anthrax, but no warning reached the community. Instead, the government crafted a story for the press and the locals, claiming foreign sailors were Greeks who had dumped diseased animals overboard, polluting the bay. The real cause? The Gruinard experiments remained a secret, locked in Whitehall files. Compensation payments followed, handled in silence. Ministry officials visited affected farms, offering cash with no paperwork and no questions. Farmers took the money, but the transaction left a bitter aftertaste. The source of the infection was never discussed openly. In ledgers now held under lock and key, the recipients are listed only as animal owners. No names, no details, only a record of quiet settlements meant to keep the truth buried. Rumors spread through the villages. Some suspected the official story was a lie, but challenging the government in wartime Scotland was unthinkable. The affected families carried the stigma for years. In Gairloch, descendants recall compensation slips tucked away in family Bibles, never spoken of but never forgotten. The memory of unexplained deaths and secret payments eroded trust in both officials and neighbours. Gruinard's contamination did not end with the outbreak. Scientists returned to the island hoping that time and weather would neutralize the spores. But year after year, soil samples showed anthrax remained as deadly as ever. The government extended the quarantine, posting warning signs on the beaches. For decades, the only person allowed to visit was a local man hired to repaint those signs. He would row across the channel, paintbrush in hand, and return without speaking of what he had seen. The official notices avoided the word anthrax until 1967. Before then, they simply warned that the island was government property and landing was forbidden. The real danger was known only to a handful of scientists and ministers. For everyone else, Gruinard became a place of whispered stories and uneasy glances across the water, a green island where the grass itself could kill. The cover-up shaped the island's fate. Gruinard was not just a test site, it became a symbol of secrecy, mistrust, and the human cost of wartime desperation. The silence imposed by the authorities would last for decades, but the consequences of that silence would not be so easily contained. In October 1981, anonymous letters arrived at British newspapers and government offices, each stamped with the words Operation Dark Harvest. The writers claimed to be a group of scientists and local activists who had landed on Gruinard Island, dug up 300 pounds of contaminated soil, and carried it away. Their demand was blunt: clean up the island or the soil would be delivered to places of power. Within days, a package appeared outside the gates of Portendown. Tests confirmed the soil was laced with viable anthrax spores. Another sack was left near the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool, not far from where Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was staying. Police launched an urgent investigation. The trail went cold, no one in the nearby villages would speak, and the group's identity remains a mystery to this day. The Dark Harvest stunt forced the government's hand. Public fear and media scrutiny grew, and by 1986, officials approved a full-scale decontamination. Over 280 tons of formaldehyde mixed with 2,000 tons of seawater were sprayed across every inch of Gruinard's soil. The most contaminated topsoil was stripped away and removed. The operation took months, and its success was tested the following year when sheep were brought back to the island and left to graze. Unlike their predecessors, these animals thrived. On April 24, 1990, Junior Defence Minister Michael Newber arrived on Gruinard. Cameras rolled as he removed the last warning signs, declaring the island safe after nearly half a century of quarantine. The heirs of the original owner repurchased the land for the same £500 paid in 1942. Yet, doubts lingered. Dr. Brian Moffat, a microbiologist, told reporters that he would not go walking on Gruinard. For many, the shadow of the past still clung to the island even as the official danger was declared over. In 1997, the public finally saw what had been hidden for over half a century. Declassified 16mm film, once locked away in government archives, revealed scientists in gas masks moving among tethered sheep, detonating bombs that sent brown clouds drifting across the island. The footage showed the aftermath, animals collapsing, blood pooling in the grass, and the methodical routines of a team working with the knowledge that every movement could mean disaster. This was the first time the world witnessed the true scale of Operation Vegetarian, 5 million anthrax-laced cattle cakes manufactured and ready to poison enemy farmland. The plan, abandoned only because the war's direction changed, would have left a continent uninhabitable for generations. The release of these images forced a reckoning with the past. Gruinard was no longer just a local legend or a line in a government file. It became a warning, a case study in the risks of secrecy and the unpredictable legacy of biological weapons. But the story did not end with decontamination or the removal of warning signs. In March 2022, flames swept across the island, turning its grass to ash and sending smoke across Gruinard Bay. Locals remembered the old stories and wondered if the heat could awaken something buried deep in the soil. NHS Highland issued a statement saying there was no risk to public health. The Ministry of Defence pledged to monitor the island for another 150 years, promising further action if needed. Yet questions lingered, fueled by memories of what had once happened here and by the knowledge that some threats do not fade with time. Gruinard remains a quiet place, but its legacy is anything but settled. Gruinard's silent fields remain a stark reminder: biological weapons never truly vanish. They linger in land, memory, and policy. Today, more than 20 countries still possess active biological weapons programs. As secrets resurface and new threats emerge, the line between past experiments and present risk grows thinner. The legacy of this island warns: what we unleash in war, we inherit in peace. Share your thoughts below.